Morning. So what we are doing today is Daf Lamed Vav in Safas Brachos, but we are up to Lamed Hey and Beis by the two dots and the wide lines, Amar Rabbi Barchana. But before we go any further, just mention that this topic that we opened up yesterday in terms of Shem Rayachai and Rabbi Shmuel, so among the different opinions that there are to potentially answer the question, so we have the opinion of those that want to be machlif, they want to change the shita in Menachos Sadi Test, to change it from Rabbi Shimon Yochai to Rabbi Shmuel and vice versa. That is one option. There are other options that include changing, not to say that Shimon Yochai here is saying that it's a chiyuv, but some Rishonim want to say that maybe Shimon Yochai is just saying that it's a mitzvah to do this. It's the ideal, but you're not actually required to, because again, of what he said in Menachos on Sadi Test. There is a more to say about it, but unfortunately, the time doesn't permit. So we continue the Gemara. New Gemara today on Lamed Hey Amud Beis, the two dots. Amar Rabba Barachana in the intermediate wide lines, about halfway down in the intermediate wide lines. Amar Rabba Barachana Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Bar Rabbi Eloi. So Rabba Barachana says the name of Rabbi Yechanan, according to Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. This is a Gemara. There are many Gemaras like this that talk about the idea of Yeridas Hadaris, that the earlier generations are a lot greater than the later generations. In what sense? Says the Gemara, the earlier generations, they made their Torah ikr, they made their Torah something that was regular, something that was kavua every single day. But a malach and haray, but the malacha for them was sort of by the by. It was on the side. It wasn't in the same way as the Torah was, and therefore zubazun iskayim biyadan. Therefore, the Torah was working out well along with the malacha. However, deras ha'achreinim, but the current generations, she'asim lachtan keva, they make, what is their thing that they make their regular, the thing that they make kavua is their work. But the Torah and arai, but they make their Torah into something that is by the by. So therefore, therefore it doesn't work out well for them. Not the Torah, not the melacha. So just a couple of points on this. Number one, the idea that the Deris HaRishonim were greater than the Deris HaAchronim, this is a fundamental point. We always find various versions of this. For example, we had the Gemara earlier on Pafam and Aleph. Remember the Gemara on Pafam and Aleph told us that Amar Papa Labai, or Papa said Labai, Maishon Hashem the Surach still Nisa, Maishon Anan. Why is it that the early generations they had Nisim, our generations don't have Nisim? So over there he said because they were the earlier generations, they were it's not because of learning, because we learn better than them. So what he said was because the early generations are Moshe Nefesh, but the current generations are not Moshe Nefesh. That was one. That's a version of it. We have a Gemara Shabbos, Kufi Tes, Kufi Beis, and starting the Gemara in Shabbos tells us about that in Rishayim or Bnei Malachim. So we're like Anoshim. If they were like Anoshim, then we're like Chamar. We're not like the Chamar of Prichas Ben Yor. We're like the regular Chamarim. So we have various Gemaras of what we would consider to be Yeridas Hadaris. Leads to a wider question, which we don't have time to go into now, which is why do we paskin like the Basroi if we have Yeridas Hadaris? The basic answer to that question is pointed out that it's not actually a Jewish mashal, it probably comes from the non-Jews, but nevertheless we've adopted it and it's a really good one. And the answer is because we are an anas al gabe anak. We are a midget on the shoulders of a giant. That is to say, we're not greater than the Rishonim, we're much less. We have the accumulated knowledge of all the different people that came before us. So if you take a giant and then you take a midget, which one sees greater? Of course, we know the giant sees greater. But if you take the midget and put it on top of the giant, then he's going to see even greater than the giant. That's how, even if we say that the Deresh Rishonim was greater than us, we can still go that the halach is like the Basra, not like the Rishonim. That's that. Another point on this Gemara is that we say If you look at the Gemara seems to be suggesting that the only way you're going to have successful learning is if the learning is kavuadik and the malacha is arai. The malacha is derech arai. What do we know? The Mishnah tells us in Avis, Yafa Talmud Torah im derech eretz. What does the lashon like that sound like? Yafa Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Talmud Torah is nice with what? With derech eretz. What's the ikr? What's the tafel? What's the ikr? What's the tafel? Talmud Torah is the ikr, and derech eretz is the tafel. That's not necessarily the only source to read it. We have other sources. For example, let's say kol teresh eni mamalacha seifeli batal. Right. There's another mission there in Abbas. Where is that relative to this? Torah is the ikr, not the tafel. The basic conversation on this point, which is seen about among the Rishonim, the Ritva, his Harash, also there's a Tes Shonim and Yuma Pehei, all ask this question: what's the Iker? What's the Tafel? The basic grammatical reading of it, I don't want to get into, other than to say it's fundamentally what the Gemara is suggesting over here. But it's not a question of Iker or Tafel in terms of hours. That is to say, the Rambam Hilchos Talmud Torah suggests that if a person is going to be up for 12 hours a day, then of course they are learning for 9 hours, and they should divide the day: 3 hours of Mikvah, 3 hours of Mishnah, 3 hours of Talmud, and 3 hours they work. Right? That's not what I'm taking as the normative. That is to say, it could be if you are the type of person that is at a stage in life where you're able to invest your capital, have your capital doing your work for you. So it could be 3 hours of time is all that you need to be able to have a parnasa, in which case that's of course what we're talking about. But if you're at a stage in your life where you have to actually still do work, it's not that your capital is working for you, you actually have to put in the time yourself to work. So then by definition, in today's market economy, so far as I'm aware, there really isn't any jobs that allow for that. Maybe some sort of a day trading job or something is the only place. But most people need to work for a significantly more amount of hours in order to be able to make a basic parnasa. We're not talking about living in the lap of luxury. We're talking about basic parnasa. So what do we mean when we say kavu and arai? We don't mean it in terms of hours per se, but really in terms of mindset. Is a person kaveh every single day to learn? If a person can be kaveh every single day to learn, and that is the ikr part of the day they're very excited about, and that is something that they always hold to. So then, even if they're working for more hours, in their mind, the malacha is arai to the Torah. It's a tafel to the Torah, and therefore, zev is then a skam b'yadam. But if a person is not putting in a specific amount of time every single day to learn, rather it's by the by when they have a chance, they come to shul on time, whatever, so they have a chance to look at a chumash, or when they, when it happens to be, they come into a shir and they hear some learning or the like. That's all right, and therefore Zubazu learning Scambia, and the Gemara is saying that will not work out for them in the long run. So I think that is the way, even though the Rambam Talmud Torah certainly makes it out in terms of hours, I think that we can also read Malachta and Arai as not necessarily specifically an amount of time, but rather a mindset. Because so long as somebody's working in order to be able to get by, there's nothing wrong with it. That's fundamentally required. If somebody is working far beyond what they need in order to get by, that's a different question, not for now. Finish the Gemara. So we are up to another member from Rabbi Chanan named Rabbi Chanan Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. Barish like there's Shim there's Achronim. There's Shim Achronim. There's Taraxamain. The Greek word basically is some of them Rishonim want to say that it comes from the Gemara Truku Gali. Remember the Gemara before in Brachot Chavches, we talked about when Rabbi Gamliel was making up with Rabbi Shua, so they came to the Beis Medrash to say that that they've made up, and Rabbi Kiva said Truku Gali, like close the gates, right? We're not listening to these messengers of Rabbi Gamliel. And then Rabbi Shua himself had to come and say, no, it's fine, right? That that he and Rabbi Gamliel had made up, and it was fine to let him back in. So when it comes to Meiser, the question is, when does the chiyuv start? So we hold that the chiyuv starts when it comes into the house, when it comes into the chutzner, but it has to come in a normal way. If you're putting it in through the roof, then it's not considered being seeing the house, and so therefore you're not going to be chayiv in it. So the early generations, what we're saying is that they were very happy to be chayiv in ma'aser. They weren't trying to delay the chiyuv, so they would bring it in normally. But the current generations, they're arbechilchums, right? They're very smart. They're trying to avoid the chiyuv of ma'aser, so they bring it into the house in a very awkward way, which doesn't create that chiyuv. So it says the Gemara, so they're bringing it in all these various manners from the roofs, from the back with the chutzes, like any way which would not be make it b'chayv b'mais. Number b'anei, ain't a tel m'chayv b'mais. Actually, your pnei bayis according to Rabbi Yanai. The table is not mechayev and meiser until it comes and sees the house in a normative fashion. Shneimar me'arti akadosh min habayis. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees in terms of exactly when it becomes chayav. Rabbi Yochanan says afilu chatzik levas. So he holds that it's an earlier stage when it sees the chatzir. In any event, the way the Durs Harishonim would do it would be to mechayev meiser from that. Any questions? But the Durs Harishonim are trying to avoid ma'aser, therefore they're bringing it in very, very interesting manners. But again, the wider point is the same idea as what we just said, which is the Durs HaRishonim are not like the Durs HaAcharonim; they're far, far greater. Okay, continues the Gemara. Now we are back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us that on Yayin you don't make the bracha of ha'etz, rather you make a special bracha, the bracha of Ber Pri Hagefen. Blessed, right, is the Rebbeinu Shalom created the fruit of the vine. So the Gemara wants to understand now a whole bunch of different brachas, why they get the brachas that they get. So says the Gemara, why is it that wine gets a different bracha than the grape? The grape, you make a ha'etz, but the wine doesn't get ha'etz, the wine gets the special bracha, ber pri hagefen. Right, what would be ber pri eitz? Right, blessed is the fruit of the tree. So ber pri hagefen is the blessed is the fruit of the vine. It's a specific bracha just for wine. Why is it this way? Right? And remember, we don't say when you have orange juice, you don't say when you have orange juice bar pri eitz anymore, right? You don't make a special bracha on orange, right? Orange juice. It's specifically wine that gets its own bracha. So the Gemara wants to understand why is it. Says the Gemara, maybe you say because you've now changed it, right? And you made it better. The you changed it to make it better. So therefore, since you've made it better, you should get a new bracha. What about oil? Oil, you didn't get a new bracha. What happens if somebody drank oil? Do you make a special bracha on it? You do not. But oil is obviously you made it something very special now. When you take a zayis, when you take an olive, and you make it oil, and nevertheless you don't get a new bracha. So why is it that by wine you're getting a new bracha? What's the bracha that you make on Shem and Zayis? Again, if somebody was drinking oil, they should make ha'etz, according to what Shmuel is saying, or according to Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Ruda, remember, is a student of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. And of Rav. Here he's quoting Shmuel, and Rabbi is quoting Rabbi Yochanan. That on Shem and Zayis, on the oil, you make a ha'etz. So the Gemara is asking, why is it that on oil you don't change the bracha, whereas by wine you do? So the Gemara says, Amri, we're going to answer like this: the situation by oil is not a vart in the change that you made to the oil. It's that you don't think it deserves a bracha. We can grant you the idea that oil deserves a bracha. That would be different. But we have a technical problem. We have technical difficulties. What's the technical problem? The technical problem is in brachas. That's why we don't give it a special bracha. But we agree with you. We grant you the idea that changing something for the better should give it a new bracha. So what is it? He says, the Gemara explains. By the oil, it's not possible. How are you going to make a bracha? What are you going to say? Navrach ber pri hazayis? Are you going to say, let's make the new bracha instead of ber pri eitz when you eat the olive? Now you're going to make a ber pri hazayis. What does it mean, ber pri hazayis? Blessed, right? Is the Rebbeinu Shalom was created the what? The fruit of the olive. So the more that doesn't really work because pera gufa zayas ikri, the fruit itself is called the olive. As in other words, as Rashi explains, what's the problem with saying that the fruit making a bracha ber pri azayas? So Rashi says zayas ikri. If you look in the Rashi's, it's further up on the page. Zayas ikri Rashi says v'havile ber pri hapri. Hapri kari zayas ve'en zu bria shemayim. Kibdei adam he bria zu. Avagabe gefen hagefen here eight. V'anavim heim pri hagefen. When you're making a bracha, blessed is the Rebbeinu Shalom on the ber pri hagefen. You're blessing the Rebbeinu Shalom was given the fruit of the vine. What's the fruit of the vine? It's not a geffen. The fruit of the vine is an oven, is grapes. So it's saying something else. You're blessing the Rebbeinu Shalom for the fruit of the vine, so you're thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for the grape. But if you say ber pri hazayas, you're thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for the what? Not for the fruit of the olive tree, because the olive tree is the olive. You don't have a different shame for it. It's not like on the vine, which is called the geffen, and the grapes are called anavim. They have different names. By the olive, the tree is called the zayas, and the fruit is called the zayas. So therefore, you're stuck. So it's a technical difficulties problem, not a substantive one. We agree with you that by changing it for the better, you should have made a new bracha. But here we're stuck. Therefore, both Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel say that on olive oil you make the bracha of ber pri eitz the same way you would make it on the olive itself that you were eating. So the Gemara says, this is like, call 1-800 and you'll find your technical difficulties will be solved. I have a very simple answer. V'navrach ber pri eitz zayas. Okay, you're getting stuck up on nothing. Instead of saying that the fruit of the tree is a problem because the fruit of the olive is the olive, great. So say the fruit of the olive tree. And if you're going to say ber pri eitz zayas, so then you're not going to have this problem. You'll get out of your technical difficulties because essentially then you're talking about the fruit of the olive tree, which is the olive. Says the Gemara. Okay, we have to come up with a different answer. We have to come up now with a more substantive answer. What's going to be the more substantive answer? There's a fundamental difference between oil and wine. What's the difference? Wine is not zayin. It doesn't satiate. Whereas, did I say wine or I don't remember? Oil satiate. I'll try that again. Wine satiates and oil does not satiate. Chamra zayin, mishra loy zayin. Right? Oil does not satiate. So says the Gemara, what does that mean? Mishra loy zayin. How do you know that mishra is not going to satiate? Right? But if the idea is about satiation, right, then what we're really saying now is a substantive point. What's the substantive point? Wine which satiates is entitled to a new bracha because it has something special about it. It satiates. Olive oil, since it doesn't satiate, doesn't get it entitled to a new bracha. So says the Gemara, but I'll challenge you on the substance. Who said that oil doesn't satiate? Vatnat. But we learned, the Mishnah tells us, somebody makes a neder from eating. So mutar b'mayim u'v'melach. He is permitted to have water and salt. And the Gemara asked over there, what's the reason that he's allowed to have mayim u'melach? Because that's not called mazon. So if somebody's saying he's going to be swearing off food until he gets his neder, removed. So he's going to be usher to eat, but he's permitted to drink and he's permitted to have salt. Why? Because those things are not considered satiation. But hakol mili ikri mazon. That means that other food items, they are satiating. So you see what that oil is satiating. So since you see that oil is satiating, it should get then a special bracha. So says the Gemara, before we get back to responding to our point, at this stage of the Gemara, we think that mayim and melach are not mazon. Oil, shemen, should be considered mazon, and therefore should get another bracha. But by the Gemara now puts in an additional point, which is name it to have a tiyuf the Rabbi Shmuel. Let's say that this halacha of nedim and amazon is actually going to be a slugging up another idea that we learned that from Rav and Shmuel. The Rav and Shmuel said the following: the Rav and Shmuel the Amri ein mevarchim bar minim mezainis ela behei haminim bilvad. Rav and Shmuel said that you do not make a bar minim mezainis except on the 5 minim, right? The chamesh minim. What are they? Right? If you look at the Rashi of Amar Ravunim, Rashi brings down what are the chamesh minim dagan? Right? They are chitin, sa'aron, kaisman, shibar, l'shul, and shifan. Right? So these are the 5 things, right? The wheat, the barley, the oats, the spelt, right? These are the things that we associate normally when somebody making mezainis. The Ram and Shmuel said that the only things that get a mezainis are on these 5 minim. So the Gemara says this should be a stira to Rav and Shmuel, because now we're learning out that there are many things that are muzzin. There are many things that satiate you. So there should be mezainis on a wider variety of things than just the chamesh mini dagan. So now the Gemara says, okay, let's slow down. V'amar Avuna, no. Let's not make the mistake of thinking that when we said Hanoidim and Hamazon, somebody who is making an oath not to have food, that we said that it included oil and included lots of things, that means now that really you should say mezainis on many things because everything's mazon. No, that's not how to read it, says Ravuna. Ravuna, what we're talking about is Ba'emer Kol Hazon Alai. When somebody says, I'm answering on myself food that will satiate me, but not food that is called mizainis. In other words, everybody could have food that satiates them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that food is mazin. Right? A person could eat a lot of candy. That could be full. And that doesn't mean that candy is now called mizainis. Certain things have the term that they are considered satiation, and they get entitled to mizainis, and those are the chamesh minei dagan. But when somebody says they're answering on themselves food that will satiate them, that could be a much broader variety than foods that will be called mazin and then get a mezainis. So there's no kash on Rav Shmuel. It's totally irrelevant to Rav Shmuel. But getting back to the wider point of the fact that it could, it could nevertheless satiate a person, right? A lot of things could satiate a person. Many things that satiate a person, and nothing to do with the mezainis. But a person can still get full on it. A person can still be satiated on it. So says the Gemara, Alma Mishcha Zayin. But what you see here is that oil, nevertheless, could satiate somebody, could fill somebody up, because only mayim and melach that you don't, that would be permitted. But other things, other food items, would be aser, including oil, because there's some element of satiation that would apply to somebody who drinks oil. So the Gemara says, "Elacham soid and mishchad loisoid." We're not talking here about just simply, being something that a person could eat that would fill them up a little bit. We're talking about soid. It's an additional level of it's not just simply food that goes into a person, but soid is a proper kind of a meal, like a proper satiation. A person's going to be full on it, and chamer can make somebody full, but mishcha loisoid. So therefore, at this stage of the Gemara, since yain is soid and mishka is not soid, so yain gets entitled to a special bracha, and mishka, right, the shemen is not going to get entitled to the special bracha. Says the Gemara, really? The chamra mi soid? Do you think that wine really, really fills a person up? The harava havishos chamra komali yom de pischa. Rava would drink wine a whole erev Pesach. Why did Rava drink wine a whole erev Pesach? Right. Remember, the Mishnah tells us in the beginning of Arvi Pesachim, right? What did the Mishnah tell us? That by Samach Lamencha, right, a person is not supposed to be, eating. Why? Because you want to have a person to be eating the matzahs l'tei oven, and if a person's eating on erev Pesach, they're not going to be hungry. They're not going to eat the matzah. Not going to eat the matzah l'tei oven. So how could Rava drink? If Rava is drinking wine on erev Pesach, and Rav is drinking the wine on Erev Pesach, so in order to be able to make his heart desirous of eating matzah, he should eat more matzah. So I don't get it. If wine is soid, if wine satiates a person for real, like it's really could fill you up and never let you down, that was a joke. How could it be that Rava is drinking so much wine on Erev Pesach? Right, did you hear the Gemara's question? Then clearly this is a raya, according to the Gemara at this stage, that in fact what? wine is not sod. So if wine is not sod, then wine shouldn't be getting a bar pri hagefen. That's where the Gemara is going to now. So the Gemara answers, no. Tuva garer purta sod. If you drink exorbitant quantities, of wine, then that actually increases your appetite. But if you drink minor amounts of wine, that fills you up. I am not an expert enough wine drinker to know if this is, in fact, everybody's experience, but this is the Gemara says over here. So that is to say, if you drink a lot of wine, that will increase your appetite. If you drink a little bit of wine, that will fill you up. And therefore, therefore comes that now that wine is still side. So therefore, wine is still entitled to a special bracha. So before we go any further, just to mention on this point, the bottom Taisus here, Tuva Gar, Taisus says that the wine, if you drink a lot of it, it increases your appetite. So Taisus says, Mikan mashma she'asa lishtes yain b'erev Pesach, min ha-mincha l'mayla, will be also to drink wine from the mincha and on Erev Yantif, v'imrait to lishtes, tzarech lishtes harbe. But if you want to drink, you must drink a lot. The tuva migra gar, because a lot of wine is going to make you have a good appetite to eat the matzah on Pesach by night. I should just mention, what is Rava's proof that you're allowed to drink wine? More there in Pesachim Kuf Zayin. What is Rava's proof that you're allowed to drink wine and Erev Pesach a lot? So the more there explores it, the more it says, because Rava says, we learn that you're allowed to drink wine between the first and second cup. Right, between the third and the fourth cup, you're not supposed to drink, right? And during the meal, you're allowed to drink, right? So between the first and the second and third, you can drink. But between the third and the fourth, you're not supposed to drink at all. How could it be? How could you drink extra? So it says there's a proof that that's not going to hurt your ability to eat the matzah, because it will make you more interested in eating the matzah teyov, and that's Rava's proof that when you drink wine, tuva gar, that if you drink a lot of it, it increases appetite. So now the Gemara at this stage is still at the place where yain is sod, and therefore, since yain is sod in a way that mishcha, right, in the way that shemen is not, so therefore yain gets a special bracha and shemen does not. Good. So the Gemara says, but one second, I have to revisit that point fundamentally. Says the Gemara, umi sod klal. Who says that wine fills you up at all? The pasuk is clear in Tehillim. What is sod? What is sod? Not wine. Lechem is sod. Wine is not sod. Wine just makes you happy. So the more answers no. Namahu the sod. Chamer loy sod. I'm sorry, that's part of the question. Namahu the sod. Chamer loy sod. What are you talking about? Bread is what makes you full. Wine doesn't make you full. Al chamer isbei tartik sod u'misameach. Nahama misad sod smuchel misameach. So actually, it says the Gemara. No, it's not true. Nama, in fact, fills you up like it says in pasuk. But by wine, it not only fills you up, that's pashut, but we're adding an additional aspect of yain in that pasuk, which is it's misameach. Yain has an additional aspect, then it makes a person very happy. So now at this stage of the Gemara, again, you don't have a question on wine. Wine is still different than oil. So the Gemara then says, okay, so if yain now has two aspects, then it has both the aspect of sod and it's misameach, so it's really a wonderful thing. So if it's like bread, and you're saying that they're both sod, so then why don't you treat it like bread? And the same way you say by bread, after you have to make benching. So why do you bench after you drink wine? So the Gemara says no. Loy kavi inishu desai aluya. Person does not make a meal out of wine. Clearly, they haven't been to some wine tastings, but at least in theory, people do not make a meal over wine. Since they do not make a meal over wine, you don't make berachas hamazon after wine. So right? They also had tastings in those days, right? So people wanted to sit down and taste all the different wines. So what happens if somebody does in fact be kaveh over wine? Should he now bench? So the Gemara says, Amarle, the Rabbi answered him, when Elio comes along, he will decide if this was considered a kavuadik thing, which would require you then to make brachas hamazon. But until Elio Navi comes along, hashta mia bat ladaita it's a kol adam. Since most people never make a meal over wine, this oddball who wants to try to make a meal over wine to try to figure out if he's b'chliv in brachas hamazon, okay, your daita is batal it's a kol adam. Your question is an interesting one. We'll deal with it when Navi comes. Good. So this is like a version of like take. We're not answering the question. We don't know. It's an interesting question. If yain is really soy like bread, and a person an oddball, but he wants to make a meal over wine, he wants to chase a whole bunch of different ones. So should he bench? It's a fair question. And Mar doesn't have an answer to that, except for the fact that nowadays we will not. Whether or not we will ever do that will be decided by Elio Navi when he comes soon. It is a Gemara. Now the Gemara wants to explore this idea that we said that an oil we make ha'etz. Says the Gemara, Gufa Rabbi Yudamar Shmuel, B'chen Rabbi Yisrael Rabbi Yechanan, Shemen Zayis Mevachim Bar Peretz. We just said that an oil you make ha'etz. So Hechidami, the Gemara wants to understand what is it the situation that an oil you're making ha'etz. Ilem Dikash Shasile. Are you saying you're drinking plain oil? Azuke Maziklei. You drink plain oil, it's gross. It's gonna harm a person. The tiny will then a brisa shows the shemen shel truma mishamas a karen. They know mishamas a chaimish. A person, if they drank oil of truma, obviously we're talking about somebody who's not a kain, so he's mazik truma, so he has to pay back the karen, right, like regular hezek, but he doesn't have to pay a chaimish. Normally, for when you're being mazik something of hektish, you have to add on something additional. You have to add on a chaimish, right? But you don't have to here. Why not? Because it's not considered like you gain nothing out of this. You only mazik yourself by drinking oil. Hasach shaman shel truma. But if somebody took the oil, right, in those days they used to use oil, maybe now also a little bit. At least the products they rub themselves with it. They anointed themselves with these kind of things. So somebody says hasach shaman shel truma shamas and shamas achemish. But that's the proper way to use the oil. If you're anointing yourself with the oil, then you're really being moral in the hektish, so you have to not just pay back the karen, you have to pay back the chaimish. So what do you see from here? Drinking oil is abnormal. You don't have to pay a chaimish. You just pay back the karen. So the Gemara says, what are we talking about when we say drinking oil that you make our eights? So you're eating, you go to the fancy restaurants, so they serve bread and they give oil, right? They have a plate of oil next to it. Why is the plate of oil? Because that's how people eat the bread. I don't know if it's how old the custom is, but clearly, in Gemara's time, people would eat it with bread. Bread and oil is a very common way to eat the bread. So the Gemara says, "Oh, really? That's your answer? So you're going to make now our eights on the oil which you're eating with the bread? That's absolutely not true. We know when you go to the restaurant and they're serving you the bread and the oil, you go wash for the bread." And you dip the bread in the oil, you don't make any bracha on the oil. Why? Because of this halacha. That when you have an ikra and a tafel, you make a bracha on the ikra, it's part of the tefillah. Of course the oil is there, but it's not something to be made a bracha on. So where do you get ha'etz from? You're not making a situation for me where I should be able to make the bracha. Drinking it straight is mazik. You're not going to make a bracha on that. Drinking it with bread, the bread's the ikr. You're not making a bracha on it. So where's the situation when you're making ha'etz on oil? That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, "Oh, the kashosile nigroid." Rather, what's happening is that you're drinking the oil ayidei nigroid. What's that nigroid? I have no idea. Rashi tells us that it's maya de silka. The Amar Shmuel and nigroid maya de silka. Right? What's maya de silka? Silka is beets. So I have no idea exactly how it worked, but they boiled the beets, and I guess they had water, and they would drink the water with the oil. And so that's how they did it. I don't think this is borscht. This is something different. But whatever it is, this mixture was something where you would have beet water, right, and oil, and so therefore, since you're drinking it, that's the situation you would make a bracha on the oil and you make a ha'etz. So the Gemara then continues, and Sigrain and Maya, now they're on Lam Vav and Aleph, and Sigrain is another kind of water that is cooked Maya de Kula Shalki with all different types of vegetables. So it's not just beets. So and nigrain is just beets, And sigrain is all different types of vegetables that the water that comes out of the cooking of that. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So you think you've solved the problem? So you're drinking the oil with this anigrain, and now you're going to make eights? Why? Imkain havile anigrain ikar v'shem and tafel. So this beet water or whatever that is drank as, that's the ikar, and the oil is going to be the tafel. Same thing as we just said. So the Gemara says, no. A person's not drinking that anigrain and has some oil in there, in which case the anigrain would be the main thing, and therefore he would be making a shahakal and not ha'etz. No. Hacham ma'askin, we're talking about a specific case. Somebody who has a throat ache, he has a cough, he has something, he has an itch, a scratch in his throat. So what's the issue then? So somebody's going to be sick, and they're going to drink this oil to heal them. It sounds insane, but I should know to you for a moment that Hitler drank oil. It was like a oil for I think it was initially created to help clean your guns or something, and people used it for medicinal purposes. It may even be still today used for medicinal purposes. It was called ballist oil because I think it came from ballistic. That's how it was created, but it was considered medicinal. People drank oil for sickness. So I don't know if they drank it or they gargled it. Rashi we're going to see it is going to explain that this next Rashi is talking about gargling. So I don't know if they necessarily swallowed it. So what happens? The time we have a brisa that says somebody, right? The background for this is that the Chachamim made a gezerah. They're not supposed to take medicines on Shabbos. I'm not getting into the topic now. It's a very interesting topic, how it applies nowadays. But the reason was because there was a fear that Chachamim gezer on refuahs, hanikaris, on obvious refuahs on Shabbos because of the fear of shchikas amanim. Again, I'm not getting into it practically today, but just for the purposes now, if somebody was ill, somebody's choshesh b'groinei, so you shouldn't be gargling oil on Shabbos. Why? Because of the fact that it's nicker, that the only reason why he's having the oil is because of the fact that he needs for refuah. Avol and shemen harbe l'toich anigroin. But if he's taking the oil which he's using as the refuah and putting it into the anigroin, into this beet water, uboileah, and then he's swallowing it and gargling it or whatever, so then it would be permitted. Why would it be permitted then? Because clearly, what is the ikr, right? Clearly, what is the reason that he's having the oil? It's obviously he's doing it for refuah to us, but it's not nikr necessarily to anybody else. Because the oil is mixed with the anigrain, so therefore you can't say that he is doing medicine on Shabbos, so you don't have the issue of shchikas amanim. So then he's just having oil and the beet water. And he's putting in shemen harbe. But if he's putting in shemen harbe and he really is only having it in his own mind for the refuah, so then what bracha is he going to make? He's going to make ha'etz. Because here the shemen is not like the regular anigron, where the anigron is the ikr and the shemen is the tafel. Here he's putting in shemen harbe. That's really what he's after. He's after whatever the healing is going to be from this shemen. So therefore he makes the bracha on the eitz on the shemen. So Moshe says, Pshita, what are you telling me? Of course. Says the more I would have thought maybe he shouldn't make a bracha at all. Why? Because it's coming really in his mind for refuah. He may be dressing it up with with having the anigran, but fundamentally it's only there for refuah. So to kamash no. Since he's having some hana from it, he has to make a bracha. Taisus points out over here in the second Taisus, Taisus says that when it comes to situation, the Adam Shoisa Mashkin im Hamashkin Ron Lishtes, if he's drinking something that's really disgusting, you wouldn't have to make a bracha. But if you have some hana from it, but if there's some hana from the medicine, then you would have to make a bracha. Okay, today's the Gemara. Just have to finish a little bit more. Says the Gemara, Kimcha dechiti. What do you make a bracha on flour, on wheat flour? So Rabbi Yehuda Omer bar pri Adama, Rav Nachman Omer shahako. It's machlokes from Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman if you make a hadama on wheat flour or you make a shahako. So Amalei Rav Nachman. Rav Rava said to Rav Nachman, Lo tifla galed Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel Kamikawa say, so Rava says to Rav Nachman, don't say your position that you say shahakal on wheat flour, say you say hadama. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel hold that you make a hadama. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'chenem Rabbi Yisrael Rabbi Yochanan, Shem and Zayis mevarchem alav per eitz. They say that on oil, you make a ha'etz. So Alma, Afagav de Ishtani, even though you're changing something, what are you changing? You're changing the Zayis into oil. Nevertheless, even though you still changed it, you still make a ha'etz. The milsaka still stays the same. So even though you're changing it, it stays the same. So you should still make a eight. So therefore, so too by the flour, even though you're changing it from wheat now to flour, you should still make it a hadama. Says the more midami. What are you comparing this to? Hasam less what did it mean by oil? By oil, when you change the oil from the zayis, there's no other change that you can make with it. That is all it's ever going to be. You have an olive, now you have oil. That's it. But But over here, you have something that's fundamentally still able to be changed from the flour. You can make bread. So since it has other uses, you perhaps cannot compare this to the situation of the oil. So yes, by an olive and by olive oil, you make eights on both. But maybe by wheat, which you make adama, and flour, maybe you should make a shahako, because you're going to have a pas, which you're going to make a hamaitzi on that. All right, we'll stop over here.